how you wanted to tell this story in both a historically accurate and emotionally resonant way.
Well, we had started out basing it on David Grant's excellent book, myself and Eric Roth, on the script. And we had taken, over a period of 2 years working on the script, during which time I did Irishman with Bob and Joe Pesci and Al Pacino. We took the character of Tom White that Leo was going to play. We felt after a couple of years, we took it to its limit. We felt that ultimately the story, seen through the eyes of the Bureau of Investigation coming in from Washington into this area to find out who did it, when, as David Grant pointed out, it doesn't matter of who did it, who didn't do it. Once I began to understand more complicity and how we all may be culpable ourselves in life to many things like this, or in many different ways, that and the fact that I got to know a lot of the Osage people, because I kept going back to Oklahoma and I kept hearing stories, and they kept speaking about, this is, the families are still there. I mean, Margie Burkhart got up and pointed out, naturally they were a little concerned the kind of films I'm known for, which, underworld, violence, that sort of thing, but she had seen Silence. And she got up at a big dinner and talked about me making Silence, but also she pointed out, and she's the great granddaughter of Ernest Burkhart, that Ernest and Molly were in love. And that a lot of these deceptions and betrayals and murders came out of people who really liked each other, including Bill Hale and Henry Rowan. They considered each other, I was told they were best friends. And I said, well, while that was going on and we were pushing your investigation story and that, I found that ultimately we were stuck. We really couldn't get into the very real or the true nature of what this tragedy was. At which point Leo said, well, why, where is the heart of it? And I said, well, the heart is that Molly and Ernest are in love. He says, so maybe I should play Ernest. At which point everything turned upside down. And instead of from the outside in, we were from the inside out. And then we really got to work for another year and a half or so, and even while we were shooting on the script. And so the Bureau of Investigation come in, and they did solve a lot of the issues, and there were those are the results. You see it in the film, but primarily it's told as much as possible from the ground level, in which the Osage are there and the European American together, living together.
The next question is for Lily. The filmmakers worked hand in hand with the Osage Nation, like Mr. Scorsese was explaining, in striving for authenticity in the film. Can you talk about the importance of this collaboration and responsibility in doing it right?
I mean, it was everything. And I'm sad that that hasn't been the precedent this whole time. I feel that, as an actor walking into this and being Native American and having played Native roles extensively, I often play roles from tribal nations that I'm not from, that each time it's kind of a cultural, not a culture shock, but definitely you go through an acculturation period. And I think, some other films I've done, not this one, people just kind of take for granted that there are 574 different federally recognized nations in the United States. We're not a monolith, and we're not homogenized. I speak some Blackfeet language from where I grew up. I grew up on my father's reservation, one of his nations. But Osage is a foreign language to me. And a lot of people kind of assume that Native actors just know how to speak the Native American language. But really, I was coming in learning everything I could and being as respectful as I could, like I would expect an actress to come into Blackfeet country and to tell a story about one of our ancestors. What was wonderful was that production, for such a long time before we ever got there, we're building these relationships with the community. So by the time I arrived, there were already a lot of people that were willing to meet with both of us, to talk with us about both of our characters, to really work with me on how an Osage woman at the time would have conducted herself. Historically, where was Molly's, where was her psyche at that point? Having been, we never mentioned this in the script or in the story, but Molly had been one of the kids who had gone to boarding school, and that in itself is kind of a traumatic experience, but she probably was pretty successful at it. Knew how to knew absolutely how to be in community, but also knew how to be around white men, So there was a lot. It was a different culture. It was a different time. It was a different period. But the most important element of all of it for me was that I was never alone on set. If I was uncertain about a choice I was making, there was not just one, but several Osage people in every level of production close at hand. I knew that every time I spoke this language, there was Janice and Chris listening on the other end. Janice's father created the Osage dictionary that is used now in language revitalization efforts, and she's very, very particular about pronunciation, grammar, all of it. Yeah, it was a great comfort as an actress, and it's also just essential because, drawing out the culture in such a vivid way sets the scene in a way that isn't, this isn't like it's not like you're going to an art market where you're appraising the authenticity of like this rug made by this native artisan. It's like you had to have that world feel that way in order to have these authentic human beings that the audience will feel for, will love, will connect with. We had to have the family dynamics, the love between the sisters, as that's when you feel that love for these characters, you feel that loss. And I think without Marty accepting that first invite that Grey Horse sent him when they knew production was coming in. Like Grey Horse invited Marty out. They said, we're going to put food on the table and talk to you about some of the concerns we have. And Marty, because he is the legend that he is, because he's the incredible human being that he is, did the right thing and went. I think there are other people that probably would have stayed far away from that or would have never accepted that invite. But it was crucial, as he just said, it made the film what it is. And I really do hope that for all filmmakers who are working with community and who are working with stories and histories like this that are so relevant today still, that they're as careful and that they're as community oriented in doing so, because it's only going to strengthen the work that you do.
And as a member of the audience, I can tell you that we really do feel and appreciate that authenticity. It really comes across. The next question is for the whole cast, so you feel free to jump in. You are a cast full of multiple talents. Well, that's definitely sure. What was your collaboration like? And how did Mr. Scorsese help you find the tone of the characters? I'll start with you, Leo.
With me?
Yes.
Well, I think it started with the onset of how to tell this story. And really, in the original screenplay, Molly and Ernest was a kind of footnote to a larger scale, as Marty said, investigation into whodunit. And oftentimes, having worked with Marty, you realize that story is kind of secondary to him, and the exploration of the human condition and who people are is first on his priority list. He goes for the emotion. And I know that when we read the initial screenplay, we were both sort of shocked and felt the tragedy of this dynamic between this white man and this Osage woman, and him admitting the complicity and the betrayal that he had committed to not only the community, but the woman that he loved. And I think that first shift that we made opened up our whole world to kind of being investigators of the truth of this history, and listening to, of course, the Osage community, which then made it another shift to understanding what a heroine Molly really was in this whole story. Like Marty said, David Grand's book is genius, and he put a lot of thought and care into this. But we ultimately, as important as the forensics of the FBI was at that time, we started to understand that she was really a catalyst into bringing attention to these murders. You know, this was under the jurisdiction of the FBI, but she went on a train, brought the funding, you know, and really was outspoken in trying to bring justice to this community. But more so than anything, you know, I just felt a tremendous gratitude and appreciation that we got to tell this forgotten part of American history. And that just led us on a journey to tell the truth about who these characters were. I mean, we can all have our own interpretation as to who Molly was, or Ernest, or Hale, or anybody else in the screenplay, but we really did our best to, after talking to the Osage community, to try to tell the truth of their emotional dynamics and who they were as people.
And for you, Bob, as you worked with Mr. Scorsese several times now, how was it this time? How was that collaboration? How did he help you find a tone for Hale?
Well, Marty and I, this is our 10th movie together. It's always a great pleasure to work with Marty, and the pace is always great. Everything is great when we get together and work on the script, as he and I and Leo did at times in certain scenes during the course of the shooting. It's always a pleasure. It's just the best, and you know, it's a process of it's just so enjoyable. It's I don't know what else to say.
That's a lot. And Jesse, how was it for you to work with these giants?
Well, yeah, as Lily said, by the time I showed up, it was so apparent how much work had already been done. Before I got there, I was sent this research packet with pretty much everything I could ever want to know about Tom White, along with David Grant's book. But my experience working with Marty and these guys is there's this constant exploration and constant search for finding the essence of what's really happening in this scene. And so there was a lot of a sense of exploration and discovery. And I feel like most of our conversations that we had about Tom specifically had to do with religion and spirituality and these types of men that, you know, did adhere to a certain religious philosophy, but it wasn't in a way that was preachy or judgmental, but all about the way that they walked through life themselves. So, but yeah, it's a process, as it always is, but a fun one.
The next question is for Leo and Lily. The dynamics of your characters' relationship is so complicated, drastically evolving as the film goes on. Can you share what you learned about Molly and Ernest's relationship preparing for the role?
I mean, we sat together. One of the first times that we had gone out in the community together was to sit with Margie Burkhart, as Marty mentioned, the granddaughter of Molly and Ernest. Her father was Cowboy, the little boy that you see in the film. Margie had never met her grandmother. She passed away long before she was born. There were some people Leo was able to connect with that were in the Burkhart family, the non-Osage Burkhart, because there are a lot of Osage who have the name Burkhart, but then there's the Burkharts. You sat with he and Brian, because, you know, community says both, sat with their niece, and she shared stories of her uncles, you know, Ernest one time a year getting drunk at Christmas on like spiked eggnog or something like that. But what she shared was that whenever he was pressed about it, the only time this sort of mild-mannered, quiet man, as I assume after this story that, you know, we're sharing in the film, he was changed, but he still showed up. Like, he moved back to the community after prison, and anytime somebody brought up Molly, he would get irate and just talk about how much he loved her. And, we talked about it early on as perhaps it was just the musings or the ramblings of a guilty old man trying to convince himself of this, or maybe it was really true. And to me, I think the biggest evidence that it was true was there were a lot of white men who married Osage women at the time that were outwardly abusive, that were very controlling, that tried to make her an obedient wife, the way that Hale tries to encourage Ernest to do so. Ernest Burkhart learned to speak fluent Osage so he could speak to Molly more on her level. Not every white man who married an Osage woman would bother to learn the language, but Ernest did. He loved his kids. He even after the trials, after it was very clear everything that had been done, Cowboy as a young man would be sitting with his family, with his Osage community, and then have to excuse himself because he had to go pick up, what did he call him, Killer or Dynamite or something?
Yeah.
He'd given his dad the nickname Dynamite, or given his dad the nickname Killer, and just like, well, I got to go pick him up now. So there was, as twisted as that sounds, this was a son who was still loyal to his father and a father who still loved his son. So I feel like where we really found this evidence of this very difficult and difficult to navigate and articulate love story in a film, it was in the evidence of the legacy they left. People spoke about Lizzie, the little girl. One of her friends, Cecilia Tallchief, is an elder in the community. And Cecilia would talk about how Lizzie was very fun-loving, how she always had parties. She and Cowboy really loved to laugh, really loved to be with other people. And I think there's evidence that their home life would have been like that with their parents. So yeah, we kind of found it in those little gaps, even though people didn't have much face time with Ernest and Molly together that are still alive to share those stories with us. We kind of shaped it. And then, we were early on when we were finding this dynamic. There were also a number of scenes that were scripted that could be played a number of ways. One of the first ones that we did together in the first week had to be moved up in the production schedule because production is production, locations need to be shuffled around, what have you. So we really hacked into a scene that we thought we were going to have several months of discovery on set to get to, but then it got moved up to the front of the line. So we shot that one, I don't know how many takes we must have done, Marty, at least 5 or 6 different versions of this one scene, playing with different levels of complicity on Ernest's part, different levels of love, different levels of suspicion Molly would have held, different levels of, maybe ways that Ernest would have been abusive in the home. And that scene particularly verbally. But ultimately what we landed on in that scene that we spent all day hacking away at was the scene where you see the most love. And it seemed like that was the take that in every scene that we were kind of fishing out, that dynamic early on, the one that always survived was that care that these two had for each other. So then by the time we got middle of production, we had that pretty well down. And then it became about, all right, how are you living with your complicity in all of this? And how is Molly not seeing it? So then we really had to focus on, our own lanes in that regard, while always maintaining this real fondness for one another as these characters. Yeah, and Leo's just easy to be around, so that was that was a delight to discover.
Anything, Leo, you'd like to add about that relationship?
Other than how absolutely bizarre it was that this love story existed when I first read about it, it was shocking. And I think early on, Marty and I started looking at old movies and talking about how do you make a love story like this work. We looked at a lot of Montgomery Clift's work. We looked at A Place in the Sun, which is all about greed and the corruption of the American dream. And we're like, this type of love story has been done before. It's, and Marty's obviously somebody that doesn't like doing things in a traditional way. And by shifting this focus between these two characters, and then learning again over and over through our conversations with the Osage community that as bizarre and twisted as it was, they really did have an amazing connection together. And even more so, they continued to see each other after the trial, you know. They but our job was really, more than anything, to just try to really focus on telling something in the most believable way as we possibly could. And as far-fetched as it may seem to others who see this movie, who are shocked at the atrocities that Ernest continues to commit, and Molly's, you know, understanding of what's going on. It's based in you know, hard evidence. And it's based in a sense of community from the Osage, of a story that in a lot of ways that they have, you know, not openly talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we were 100 years later, sort of bringing up these ghosts and these stories from the past in the actual locations, and working with direct descendants of this tragedy. So it was all I can say, it was an honor to be a part of this movie and telling this story.
I think it's an honor to have all of you in it. The next question is for you, Bob, and for Leo, because you both worked with Mr. Scorsese. In your case, Leo, it's been a couple of decades now. And Bob, you mentioned it was your 10th movie. So the question is, what is it about him, both personally and professionally, that you just keep on coming back?
Well, it's always been just easy and gratifying, if you could say, rewarding. I mean, it just something to do. We did it. We found projects. We do them. It's always been great. So I've been very lucky to have been able to do 10 movies with Marty, and hopefully we'll be able to do a couple more.
Yeah.
You know, so that's all I can say.
And we're lucky to have seen you in them. I hope you can do some more. What about for you, Leo?
Well, you know, in a lot of ways, these two men that we're speaking to have been like cinematic father figures to me. I got to do my first major starring role with Bob, and he and I worked together. He told Marty about me, and I've gotten to do 6 films with him now. And here we are 30 years later, and it's been this amazing experience to be able to work with both of them together, and watch their shorthand too. You know, the way that they sort of telepathically communicate things to one another on set by gestures and nods, and a whole scene can shift on a dime. But I just remember those moments that we all had talking about the final way that this relationship between Hale and Ernest would culminate. And it was this distillation of stripping away what we thought we should be doing, and ended up in just the truth, which is, here's this father-son dynamic, and here's this man that has been, you know, under the thumb of somebody that has been controlling, and how do they relate to each other when they have to say that they need to part. And I just remember fondly those rehearsals that we had together, because it was an amazing creative process to get to that moment, and it could only happen with, you know, these two cinematic heroes of mine. You know, they kept hammering home what is the truth of their dynamic over and over again, and we got to that moment.
And Bob, how was it for you to work with Leo to create that relationship that really is so important in the film?
Again, I'm very lucky. Leo, we have a long history, and finally we got to do a movie after This Boy's Life 30 years later, or give or take a year or two or whatever. And it was as it should be. And we might have another one or two, maybe, you never know. But it was right. And again, what I can say.
We're very lucky. Jesse, in the past few years, you've worked on Killers of the Flower Moon and The Power of the Dog. These films break the mold of the Western in both genre, politics, and in this case, by giving the spotlight to the indigenous people. Is it something you considered when you chose these roles?
I wish I could say yes, but they were just, you know, I mean, Power of the Dog was an incredible script. When I read it, I could tell it felt like something I hadn't read before. It felt like a take on a Western that I hadn't seen before, which was really exciting. And then my introduction to this story was David Graham's book, and I don't know if I necessarily looked at it as a Western, although I know it does fall into that genre. I was more taken by just the story itself. But you know, I grew up loving Larry McMurtry, who maybe not to this extent that we're experiencing now, but did do some interesting work in kind of dissecting this mythology that we've seen in Westerns and the cowboy myth for years and years. So it is something that, you know, being from Texas, growing up around these types, something that I kind of inherently understand and have an interest in. But you know, I'm much more interested in the truth than something that is you know, manufactured or sort of yeah.
And the next question is for you, Leo, about the challenges in portraying such a conflicted and complex character like Ernest.
The challenges, well, in a lot of ways, when you do the proper research and you're able to look, Oklahoma, the residue and the remnants of the Osage reign of terror is generational, and it's still evident within the communities there in Oklahoma. And we were there a century later, and you know, a lot of the injustices are still occurring to this day. Getting to play Ernest and trying to bring truth to that character was, again, just simply about listening to those stories and trying to get to as truthful a moment as we possibly could in portraying Molly and Ernest. But I don't like, besides my character, what is fascinating to me about this story is we think this is a century old, but you know, places that you know, are rich in most resources are often most drenched in blood. And we see this not only in America, but all around the world. This story is a microcosm for a much larger story about indigenous people and lands, and it's still happening today. That to me was, you know, one of the most shocking revelations in telling this story.
In that sense, the next question, and probably the last, is for Mr. Scorsese. Has to do with your on-screen appearance at the very end of the film. I guess we can say this won't come out. Allows it to emphasize the veracity of the atrocities committed against the Osage. How did the idea of you reading Molly's obituary come up?
Well, the radio show, was an actual show. I mean, this is Eric Roth's version of it. Excuse me. And it was shot after the initial shooting of the film was completed. I did it in New York, where the radio shows did take place. And I was taken by the impact of the realization that all of this, generations of suffering and genocide and trauma, betrayals, love, hate, all of this is reduced to a half-hour piece of entertainment. And somehow I had to find a way to make the transition of something as shocking as the radio show to bring us back to the heart of the picture. And I honestly didn't know how to direct it. And being there in New York after coming back from Oklahoma, editing the picture a little bit and shooting it at my old high school, Cardinal Hayes High School, my wife and one of my daughters, my granddaughter out there coming to visit, and there were people there. Something hit home as I was repeating the lines, and I felt that Um, I felt in an odd way too that this is a film and one could say it's entertainment. So in a way, we make the entertainment now, but it's on people's lives. It's on people's souls basically, and we have to remember that and to keep it in balance. And so in a funny way, there's a culpability that I felt, but that's me. I felt, and I thought, well, maybe after going through the readings of it, I felt secure then that I didn't have to reshoot it with another actor. But I felt also I should just take on the role. If you say, well, Marty, you like the old Westerns and they were shown this way and the Native Americans were shown as bad. Yes, I did like the old Westerns. Yes, I am part of the system. Yes, I am European American. And yes, I am culpable. So I think I took that on. I couldn't verbalize that as I was doing it, but when I edited, when Thelma and I put it in, we felt it. And so I guess I put it on me.
Well, I thought it was great, and it was surprising, like the whole film, thrilling.